All right, and this is the first episode of Arguing Some Antics. Okay, so I'm Kevin. You know me from our past Hearthstone podcast that no one has yet watched. And does anyone want to introduce yourselves? Kurt, go first.
I am Kurt, and you do not know me.
I am Ryan Deja. You don't know me either.
This is SoFlo, but in this forum, I'd be Austin, also from the Hearthstone podcast.
Okay.
We're all very excited to be here. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, great. Thanks for calling in. We appreciate your comments. Yeah. Okay, let's go to the first topic. So, this is one that got some publicity like maybe 2 weeks ago. Maybe a little more than that. So, the New York Times hired some chick. Some female person. Alright. Gotta watch my language here. Alright. Her name
Female
is
identifying.
Sarah Jeong. She is an Asian tech correspondent. So, after the New York Times hired her, people went through her Twitter, obviously, and found out that she had made a large series of tweets that were, at best, borderline, and they're anti-white tweets, I guess. Let me pull this up, and I'll read some of them.
An example. Excellent.
So, let's see, the first one here is, dumb fucking white people marking up the internet with their opinions like dogs pissing on fire hydrants. Alright.
Wow.
It's kind of sick how much I enjoy, that's just not even a sentence. Okay, fair enough. She started the hashtag cancel white people.
Oh,
1, white men are bullshit. 2, no one cares about women. 3, you can threaten anyone on the internet except cops. And she has a graph that on the y-axis is whiteness, and on the x-axis is awful, and as you become more white, you become more awful. There's a whole bunch more. Let's see.
Well, I think that certainly paints a picture.
Yeah. So, alright, let me move
was
this.
the reaction not in line with that of someone making this comment about another race?
So, the argument from the New York Times side is that as an Asian woman in media, she gets a lot of racist hate and was just mocking, I guess, the racist hate that she received by mimicking it, I guess. These trolling and imitation racist messages were sent as satire many years ago, which is true. They were sent in like 13 and 14. She promised not to do it again. And so the Democratic, or I guess the left perspective, is that it was like questionable a few years ago, but it's not ridiculous. She was just doing it to try to get views or clicks or whatnot. And obviously the right perspective is that this is racism, regardless of the fact that it's against white people. It's still racism, and she probably should be not hired by the New York Times. And then to follow that up, a black female conservative by the name of Candace Owens, who works for some youth Republican organization, took all of her tweets and replaced the word white people with black people, and got suspended from Twitter for 2 weeks for simply taking her tweets and replacing one word with a different race. So I wanted to know what your opinions are, whether people should lose their job or have their hiring impacted by Twitter posts from the past, or if you think that, I don't know, Twitter shouldn't matter and that she's a relatively well-respected tech journalist and her past tweets will have no impact on her ability to cover tech topics. We'll go, I guess, the same way we introduce ourselves. Kurt, you want to go first?
Oh, excellent. Well, I think it's interesting that these comments were made 5 years ago, or at least some of them, right? So
Yeah.
we're talking about digging up comments that someone made and retroactively passing judgment on the person in the present.
Yep, 2014.
We're seeing those repercussions at that point. That it doesn't just have personal repercussions, but career ones, and they're becoming prohibitive, even more so than they are. Like, you know, if you were to say this kind of thing, if you have a position in social media with your job, or part of your job is to interact with people like that, public setting. This is just something that she put, I assume, on her personal Twitter account. So it's effectively character assassination, isn't it? And obviously, like, they're in poor taste, I think. And I found the one particularly funny. The one you said, what, like, no one cares about women? Because you can take offense to that whichever way you would interpret it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, who cares about women? Or no one cares about. God. Was it James Gunn? Wasn't he just let go from, like, the Marvel franchise?
This was literally exactly what I was about to bring up.
Okay,
Yeah,
well,
he
great.
let go of the Guardians of the Galaxy from Disney, but I mean, I think the boundaries on pedophilia is a little different than on racism against white people. So, I mean,
they're both pretty abhorrent. It's not like we're talking about someone who likes pineapple on pizza and pedophilia. You know,
Well,
I don't know. There's a large group of people who believe that you can't be racist against white people because they don't have the power in order to back up that. All right, Dejak, do you have some opening statements?
So, well, I was going to bring up the James Gunn thing too, and maybe not necessarily that it's exactly the same situation in terms of what the topic was, but more so about the greater arc of taking someone's Twitter profile and kind of using it against them for some gain or another. So the idea with the James Gunn one is that he wasn't actually making pedophilic comics. He was joking about rape, pedophilia, and it said other inappropriate material. And these are old tweets. It says decade-old tweets. And so I think the bigger problem that I have is with the fact that it's not being evenly distributed in terms of what the punishments are. Clearly with, you know, replacing the white with the black and the person getting in trouble for that. But it's kind of this weird only pick as you want to, like, take someone out for. You can't really just, like, make this like a universal rule. Like, either, you know, it's an old tweet, so he probably, I don't even know what James Gunn was doing a decade ago. I didn't think he was, you know, making any major movies at the time. He had no idea this was he's gonna become this big for Guardians of the Galaxy. So I'm kind of stuck on this point of that it shouldn't. Oh, actually, never mind. He made the Scooby-Doo movies. Big.
A timeless classic, Ryan. He was making movies, but yeah.
But yeah. But like, he gets the support from all of, you know, Chris Pratt, Batista, Zoe Saldana, everyone supporting Gunn, saying this is ridiculous. Why are we taking people out for their Twitter? Can't we just kind of let that remain in the past? And I know it's some bad things that he said, but I mean, we're gonna be honest, how many people haven't made a rape or pedophilia joke? It sounds bad, but we all know it's true. At some point or another, we've done something like that.
We have certainly made an off-color joke, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Austin, opening statements.
All right, well, much like Dejak referencing another issue, I was talking to my girlfriend's mom the other day, and there was a retired Indy 500 driver by the name of Derek Daly, who was the equivalent of, like, you know, you see like Stephen A. Austin on ESPN stuff. He was like that equivalent for like NASCAR analysts and stuff. And it surfaced that 35 years ago he used the N-word at one point. Fired, disgraced, blackballed from being able to work in the industry, and that was 2 days ago. Right? I mean, now obviously this person didn't. I would wager that what they said about white people is worse than using that word, because yeah, while that word's a bad word, it's like there is no such word that likens itself to, you know, white people, I guess. At the same time, like, that word is. The reason the N-word is a bad word is because it's demeaning to white people. What this woman did on Twitter is nothing short of demeaning white people, right? So, fact that some guy used the N-word 35 years ago at a time where, like, unfortunately, it was a much more accepted thing to say. Just how it was. He gets fired. She has, I don't know, lesser consequences for something that I don't think is any less bad.
She has no consequences, and in fact got a better job for one of the largest newspapers in the country.
Yeah.
There you go. So, I don't know. Speaks to like reverse racism at this point. We try so hard to make everything PC and make everyone else happy that who's protecting, the majority.
You have to wonder, though, like, with these cases of people digging up, or not digging up, because it is posted publicly, I guess, but when people make these
And
comments,
she didn't take them down.
and she didn't take them down, I guess, but I haven't taken down things from Facebook from 10 years ago.
But, like,
What-
if
who
you
does
get a
that?
job and people start flipping out about it, you would at least take the tweets down, right?
Oh, well, definitely.
Like, as of today, has not taken
That was an
tweets.
error. Like, what, legally, alright, so legally, there would be a statute of limitations, but this isn't in any way legal. It's
Mhm,
a private company making a decision about something they just learned about their employee.
Yeah.
But,
mhm.
like, I mean, you have to consider, what about someone, like a baby boomer, who definitely would have said not the words you're supposed to use
Mm-hmm.
back in the 60s or something, the civil rights movement. And then nowadays, they're a completely normal, well-adjusted person who wouldn't use that language, but they have before. And it's like, before it would just disappear into the ether. And that's not really possible.
I think 50 years is a bit different than 4 years.
It is.
And mind you, this NASCAR guy is like 80. Like, I would wager that most of our grandparents, you heard them use an off-color word referencing a different race at least once.
Oh, yeah.
And that's all it takes now.
Hmm.
So I
It's
don't think we'll disagree that the New York Times doesn't have the authority to hire her as a private corporation. Do you think that it devalues either her opinion or the opinion from the New York Times?
Maybe from the New York Times as a whole. Her opinion, not necessarily, because isn't she a tech article writer?
Yeah, so
She's not going to be like, these circuits are oppressing us. It would be completely outlandish if she started using any racial commentary in her articles. Now, for the New York Times in general, I'm pretty sure you could say that it adds a little bit of... It definitely discredits them a little bit. It makes you have to read them with a bigger grain of salt, I would say.
you have to imagine, now this is hyperbole, but if they were hiring a white or a white male correspondent, and then in historic tweets this person was saying this kind of thing against a minority group, you have to imagine the outcome from this would not be the same.
No.
Yeah, no, absolutely not.
It'd be much more.
So we all pretty much agree on that. So
Yeah.
we're saying there's a double standard, but it doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't super impact.
Because what are you going to do?
Exactly.
There's really nothing you can do when it comes to, if you argue for reverse racism, it paints you as more of a racist to people. So you can't really. It's not about who has the better reasoning behind it, but who has the louder voice. Right now, it's just a minority majority thing. The minority has the louder voice, so you just gotta take it with what it is. Because once again, the New York Times can't really do anything about it.
Well, they could fire her.
They could, but no matter, it seems like it was already a big issue that nothing came of.
That is
Should
true.
Should they fire her? Absolutely. Will they fire her? Probably not.
And would they really, like, could we actually believe that they're firing her because of those comments or because of the witch hunt and the bad publicity?
You'd think that would do it.
I think in a company operating in the dying media that publicity would probably be not a good thing.
But at the same time, every article too is, left or right, or every paper company is left or right. People in New York, if you do the Times, you probably left. If you do like the Wall Street Journal, you're right. Kind of just how that all shakes out.
If you're on the internet, you're Huffington Post.
All right, let's just into this one more time. What do you think people should read into people's social media tweets? Do you think that personal social media is just that? Like, what you post on Facebook and Twitter is that? Or do you think that regardless of whether or not it's your personal account and you're using it for personal uses, that still impacts your company and impacts how your company is viewed? And, you know, is there personal on the internet, I guess?
Oh, that's very tricky. I mean, like, you have to definitely consider how visible you are within the company. You know, like, there's some figureheads of companies that you can't dissociate from that kind of thing. But, I mean, especially down to, like, the grunt level or even middle management, you generally don't know who these people are. There really should be a little bit more leeway, I think, in terms of people's personal accounts, especially when they disclaim that their views are their own and don't belong to their employer. I feel like that gets overlooked a lot.
Sure, certainly the corollary of that is that while their views are their own and not the views of their company, if you have more background on their personal views, you can see how it might impact their position, like impact how they're able to do their job. Like, sure, a newspaper reporter can say, like, Bernie Sanders is the future of America and this opinion is mine and mine alone, but then you would trust their reporting of the Trump campaign a little less.
That almost becomes a careful reading issue, though. That you have to you almost have to assume that going into it. Like I said, it all comes with a grain of salt, but like, and this might be tangential, but kind of looking into, you know, maybe a biased opinion on something of like a left-leaning person on the Trump campaign. Sure, it could be biased, but if you read it critically, you might be able to see legitimate flaws within something like the Trump campaign. So you can kind of use it for your own personal benefit, but you can't take every word as truth.
So more of a reader beware standpoint.
Exactly. Because, I mean, you have to. You pick the media that you choose to listen to, but you have to know what you're getting into when you assume it's truth.
Alright. Does anyone want to take, like, the converse opinion that
Oh, she's perfectly justified in hating whoever she wants, visibly, as
Yes.
she represents her company.
Let me see if I can find a comment from Slate News here.
Oh, sure, yeah. Give us a little bit of insight
Yeah.
into the alternative.
I mean, I think any best alternative viewpoint that you'll get is one saying that it's impossible to be racist against white people. And that comes from a conflict theory standpoint in sociology, where since white people already are the majority and already hold all the power, majority of the wealth, that who's defending them is your question. Well, they're defending themselves because they're not quote-unquote oppressed in any way. So really, if you want to be racist towards white people, they don't need any defending, because no matter what you say in a tweet is not going to take power away from who they are, as opposed to minority people who are losing power because they don't have wealth, status, all of that.
Let me read this comment from the New York Times. Her journalism and the fact that she is a young Asian woman have made her subject of frequent online harassment. For a period of time, she responded to that harassment by imitating the rhetoric of her harassers. She sees now that this approach only served to feed the vitriol that we see too often on social media. And in a separate Slate News response, that this is simply like a youthful error of Sarah, and that Trumpian bigotry has taken over the media landscape, and things that weren't acceptable before. I mean, I don't really understand how that makes sense because this is in 2014, but writers of color who have forged communities on Twitter and other social media platforms communicate in language that don't necessitate cultural or linguistic code switching. Holy shit, that's a terrible defense. Okay.
Yeah.
It strikes me as word salad.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Um,
Code switching.
So the thrust of the point is that it's perfectly fine because she's been bullied before
Yeah,
and she's quote punching up.
pretty much. And she shouldn't be fired, and in general we should be much less willing to ostracize people from the public sphere due to manufactured outrage over things they once said or wrote.
Okay. You take that last section completely out of context, and you can be like, all right, yeah, that's a fair point. That you don't, hold people for what they wrote years ago. But like the rest of it is just, it's horrible. That is a horrible defense. I'm sticking to my defense, for sure.
There's really this conflation of personal effort and like class action effort that always pops up in these arguments, and I always struggle to see the connection. And I'm starting to think that people don't actually think there is a connection. I think they just suppose it sounds really intelligent. It's like, all right, so you've effectively associated what, whiteness and bigotry
What, in mine?
with, no, not you.
Oh, no.
Although you did
I
pose this, right?
Well, I did pose whiteness and bigotry, but they took it as a more personal level instead of like a whole larger scale level. But
It's really, it boils down to what, the ends justify the means. What she said, like, they're not only defending the publication's right to hire her, which I mean they do, or to fire her, which they also do. They're arguing it more on the basis of she didn't do anything wrong, so it's a non-issue. And it's like, well, that's what the debate's about.
I think
find
that almost everyone would agree that those tweets are probably wrong. I think that the degree to which they're wrong and the degree to which they're like a youthful misgiving, I think is where the sides of the issue are.
it's just kind of funny how it's painted as this like, she's just fighting back and using the same words against her against others. And you have to wonder if how much slack or how much heat she got for being a Asian female reporter, and if it was really as bad as what she made the tweets for. And I don't know about her personal life, but even still,
And whether
imitating isn't exactly the best way to defend yourself. Anyway,
most sincere form of flattery.
well, that too. Pot calling the kettle black and all
well,
that.
it's also just an escalation, and it keeps it from becoming a reconciliation, and it's just conflict at that point once you try to turn it around. And it also won't be on the same people. It'll be on what you perceive to be the same class of people.
Right, but it's the problem of racism in general is that it's a stereotypical thing. You're kind of conflating one with the rest. So you could be talking about that one white person who did you wrong, and you could be really trying to just point to him, but you read the tweet and it sounds like it applies to everyone. Becomes a racist claim for sure.
All right, I think we agree that racist claims are racist.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that is the summation of this thing. All right. So, topic 2 of 3. This is probably the shortest of the 3. Is actually posed by our own SoFlo.
Oh.
boy.
So,
Oh boy.
this topic, I want to talk about something that's near and dear to all of our hearts: the merits of progressive taxation.
Oh God.
Alright, so, while this topic was posed, I did some research, and I found an article by The Economist, which is a relatively reasonable publication.
Reasonable by whose standards?
Everyone's.
Okay, I'm just messing with you.
Pretty much. Basically, they said that they were evaluating claims by the far left, people like Bernie Sanders or Octavio Cortez or those kind of people, who argue that the U.S. taxes need to become more progressive. And what they basically found is that the U.S. is the second or most progressive in our tax scale. So the scale being, obviously, people with lower income are taxed at a lower percentage. People at a higher income are taxed at a higher percentage than every other country that they measured. Mostly because the U.S. has the lowest value added, or we call it sales tax. So sales taxes are generally regressive because if you pay a 7% sales tax, it's a larger portion of people's income at lower incomes. So what they found is the U.S. is the most progressive in taxation, but the least progressive in spending. And so I want to talk about the merits of progressive taxation, almost like how much progressive taxation is needed to keep people from the bottom of the hierarchy from being discontent, and how much progressive taxation negatively impacts the country and the economy and that kind of stuff, and also the role that states play in this, where we've seen recently wealthy individuals fleeing states like New Jersey and California and moving to lower personal tax states like Texas and Florida. So that's an extremely broad question, but take that any way that you would like to take it.
Well, let's clear up the terms right off the bat. So I understand progressive taxation to be a higher number of gradations and tax brackets.
So progressive taxation is simply the concept that the more you make, the higher
more they
percentage.
take.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Put that on my
like
ticket
you can
sign.
be a more progressive country even with only 2 tax brackets, or you could have 100 and still be less progressive. It's measured like in the percentage of your
escalation.
income. Yeah. Mhm.
I see. Huh. I would almost be more in favor of having... It'd be weird to say more progressive sales tax, because at least that's something you directly control in terms of your purchasing, and it becomes more of an individual choice.
But that's almost impossible to implement, right? Because then every store you buy something from would have to know which tax bracket you're in order to charge you a price for the product you purchased.
Well, what if instead of basing it off of your... Oh, shit. I'll say something ridiculous. How about instead of your income, they base it off of the price of the object? So instead of like 7% sales tax, like maybe something that's worth $10 gets 2% sales tax.
Where does that put you with buying houses and cars?
Oh, maybe the other way around. Let's just do it the other way around.
Regardless of how you look at a value-added tax, it disproportionately is regressive. So pretty much everywhere in the world, with the exception of places like maybe Hong Kong, have some degree of progressive taxation. The US just spends a lot of its money on like things like the military, foreign aid, and things along those lines, whereas other countries like shift that stuff right into welfare states. Like think of European countries here.
Which, so so it becomes like a two-pronged kind of debate here. Then this might actually be one of the longer topics because of it.
Yeah. So like, what do you think about progressive taxation, and how do you think that taxes should be spent?
Well, and that's exactly it. So, and it makes you wonder if there's really a problem, because you see like Bernie Sanders pushing heavily for a more progressive tax system. But But at the same time, you begin to wonder if you really need to tax more, if you really just need to redistribute your spending. And, it could really become this kind of like odd argument then, because you almost realize that you have to be either a socialist Democrat and just jack up those taxes, or almost like a libertarian, just say, what are we spending on? And then kind of realize you have to be almost like a, either a domestic, take care of domestics, or take care of international aid like we do now. You begin to wonder how much can really change by keeping taxes the same, but just redistributing more towards domestics.
And we really do have a pretty disproportionate contribution to international affairs, and we have for decades.
And our military spending is just insane.
Well, considering that, I mean, if you look at the NATO countries, I mean, we disproportionately have the burden of most of that cost.
Yeah.
So it's nice that, in all these liberal democracies, or social democracies in Europe, where they're small countries, relatively homogenous, there's less of a gap between the floor and ceiling in terms of earning potential. Like more social programs like that work, and you see more stabilization in their tax system. Meanwhile, we have bases in like every single country, for whom we're responsible for defending.
Yeah, how many bases do we have in South Korea, Kevin?
A lot. A lot is the answer.
187.
Some obscene number like that. But you see that we do spend an astronomical amount on the military. That, like, if you were to not go back in time to the end of World War II and look at how that's, like, progressively gone up since then, it's almost an irrational amount of money on the military.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that certainly did expand our sphere of influence and our trading circles and how many countries are dependent upon us for goods and services. So, you could argue that not spending that money would hurt the economy in more ways than one, not just the military-industrial complex, but also countries that have become dependent upon us for trade, and that, we don't just give them military bases for no reason. There's always a return. Like, you buy our goods and services, and in turn, we don't let the Russians kill you, kind of thing.
I wish that was just...
Who benefits from that expansion of the marketplace, though? Because it's not the average person.
Yeah, where does it go? The government's already notoriously in debt. It just makes you wonder where all that goes.
The reason I first talked to Kevin about this was because the other day I was just listening to some stuff on actually a YouTube video, but it was just talking about like different tax brackets, and it was just a couple of friends talking. One of them being Ninja, who people may know, where he was talking about how his tax bracket, he pays 35% of total earnings, right? And which is like the second highest one, right? Where he's on track to make $20 million this year. Now, granted, if you make $20 million, great. But to give up 35%, like, are you telling me that the government is responsible for 35% of the money you make? And there's another tax rate, it gets up to 40%. Like, to give 40% of what you make back. Like, I know people who live in my town. I have never once been influenced by the government. I just, like, I'm sure when I'm older, it'll be a different story. But if you make $100,000, you are, obviously that's not the tax bracket. But, like, just think about, like, it's proportionate. Like, you're giving up 40% of what you're making to an entity that you don't see largely. And I'm not saying the government doesn't do enough, and I don't know enough about economics and how it all works to know what the alternative is, but that just seems like a ridiculous number. This shook me, man. I was shook to hear that number. I never knew that it got that high. So, some of you guys might have a better idea of why or how one could change that.
So, and this is, mind you, from the Washington Post.
Oh boy.
The USA this is income taxes for the top 10% around the world. So in the USA, the top 10% pay 45.1% of taxes. So like 4.5 fold the number of people. They also have the largest share of income when compared to the UK, Sweden, Germany, and France at 33.5%. However, the US transfers much less of that wealth, where in comparison to other countries who transfer significantly more to poor populations. So, but if you look at just the tax collection graph, the US collects 45.1% of its taxes from the top 10%. In second place is the UK at 38%. So like that's a huge drop off between first and second.
So, I mean, I keep bringing it back to this, but then you see what the UK is getting for their money with the taxes. And they definitely have a lot more of a domestic safety net for everyone, as opposed to ours, which is going, once again, towards a lot of foreign stuff that we don't even really see, at least firsthand.
You could argue all day about like what the government spends money on. Like what my political school of thought is, like I think what most of the welfare stuff is crap. Like I just think that where we give money and what we spend it on, I just think like I think some of the welfare stuff is crap. I also think I'm more Republican leaning, and I'm sort of like most liberals would say, well, you know, you're not going to see guys who are making $35 million out on the streets or hungry or starving, stuff like that. But it's just, I don't know. It just seems like that you should get more for it. Like we should have less issues, or there should be more, like more of a unified opinion on how we deal with some issues and how successful we are. If that much money is being taken from the citizens who live here.
Yeah.
Bouncing back to 2015, the U.S. spent $1.11 trillion. Of that, 53.7%, which is almost $600 billion, was spent on the military, which is more than spent on everything from government, education, Medicare, Medicaid, food, transportation, everything.
Yeah.
So
and I get the original point that you're trying to make, Austin, with how it's crazy how they, you know, just hit these people who make so much money so hard. And I guess the only answer I have for that is that it's just the path of least resistance.
Yep.
It's a lot easier to tax, you know, the top 10% of people
oh,
a lot than it is to try and tax the lower 90% even more.
I fucked up. Let me retract that previous statement. Of the discretionary spending, 53% was spent on the military. For the total spending, which is $2.4 trillion, 48.5% was spent on Social Security.
Which will be gone in 20 years.
So, Social Security is 33%. Medicare, it was 27%, and the military was 16%. So, if you look at Social Security, which includes unemployment and other labor projects, as well as Medicare, which includes Medicaid and all that stuff, that's 60% of the budget, a little bit more than that.
But
So 2 point something trillion, which is, you know, much more than these other countries are collecting in taxes to begin with.
which is still insane to me. Because where, you know, you look at
Where does it go?
well, you look at like Medicaid, how Medicaid's working. It's horrible. You know, I mean, I'm not gonna sugarcoat the fact that we have one of the worst Medicare systems in the world, because we have so many people who don't get treatment, and yet we spend that much money on Medicaid. Once again, you know, including the meme, where did that? How? I'm just baffled by that. I don't get it, and especially since taxes in somewhere like England, and I know England what I learned is that England had a long-lasting system in place where everyone has Medicaid and everyone gets treated. You know, a few examples of mistreatment going aside because of, government control over hospitals and all of that. Still, on the majority, they treat a lot more people than we do.
They've been having some problems recently, where they were really underfunded and had to cancel a whole bunch of stuff.
Which makes sense because they were operating at such a high amount of treatment for such a low price.
Is this stuff like they canceled programs that were planned, or they actually had to like drop patients or like quality of care?
They had to drop scheduled surgeries. They had some problems recently. They're having a lot of issues where they're having like extreme wait times for stuff people actually need, and there's
which has always been a problem though.
The US has the best healthcare system, but it's also the most expensive. So if you have the most money, you'll get the best healthcare in the United States. However, the US doesn't. They have some ability to negotiate prices with insurers and stuff along those lines.
If you can afford insurance.
Is there any way to find a statistic, or is it even available to people? Like, what % of our national spending budget comes from our taxes? Like, it would just be nice to know, like, what the number is for, like, okay, X dollars comes from, taxes of citizens, and then even one step further, X dollars comes from this tax bracket, right?
Yeah,
and then
sure, I got that right here.
and then liken it to what that buys you for, like, an American, as an American.
So, 2015 taxes, we had 1.48 billion from individual, 1.48 trillion, excuse me.
Okay.
Whoa! Jesus.
3.42 billion from corporate taxes, and some change from customs, from duties and excise taxes. And then a lot of our spending is from trust funds that have been established over the years for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and all that stuff. And then about 600 billion borrowed. So the U.S. borrows roughly twice as much as it collects from corporate entities.
Well, then I would say the corporate entities might be getting off a little bit here. And the individuals are responsible for trillions, wasn't our like last national budget or spending plan, like how much is our national budget, like the one that the government always supposed to shut down before Christmas because they can't decide? Like, how much is that one? Isn't that like our budget?
Yeah.
And is that in the trillions?
Oh yeah. We spend trillions of dollars a year. The government spends trillions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So basically what has happened is the budget's increased like a little bit since then, but they've lowered the revenue from taxes and increased the borrowing. But I mean, the U.S. also has one of the highest corporate tax rates.
Yeah. So then,
hasn't it been getting much more lax though in the past like 3 decades? It might be more lax, but I mean that's only relatively speaking. Like,
well, the corporate tax rates have to be competitive at a global scale.
Oh, true.
What's the trickle-down effect from increasing taxes on corporations? Who does that mess up the most?
Well, the trickle-down effect is that countries incorporate in Ireland instead of the United States, and then pay their 20% instead of our 40%.
And then the profits trickle down to employees, of course.
Not necessarily true, as we've figured out from Ronald Reagan. See, this was a bad question, because it was way too broad, and there's no way we're going to solve anything with this question.
you were not going to solve
answers about tax brackets? That wasn't an open-ended question. That was a quiz to see how much Kevin's friends know about what he does. Do we pass?
So basically what we've got is that we collect a lot of money, we spend an obscene amount of money, and it's distributed poorly. It's like our spending is pretty distributed, it's just done extremely poorly, I guess. Because you figure 2.3 $3 trillion a year in, which is all of what is essentially welfare spending.
Mm.
Ban it.
Don't worry, we're gonna have a universal healthcare, and it's gonna go great.
It's gonna be great.
We're gonna be Canada, who has no competition over price point, thus no competition over quality.
That's one good thing about the U.S. healthcare system is that they're on the 4 lines of inventions.
Yeah, well, they generate all their income here, so they generate all of their new products here.
Yeah. It's risk reward. I mean, you can get great quality of care here, but it's prohibitively expensive because it was expensive to perform.
Well,
So live in Puerto Rico, get hit by a bus in America. Or live in Costa Rica, get hit by a bus in America. Pay no taxes, but then use our healthcare system and be a citizen here. I wonder how does that work? If you're a so say I'm an American citizen, right? I have healthcare in America. I go start working in, I don't know, work for the Bahama Royal Police, right? Collect paychecks down there, pay less taxes, right? Live down there. I need a surgery. I'm sick. Come back here. Am I even getting jammed up for that?
No, you're green carded. As long as you're green carded in the other or in
you
the
don't need to
other.
be green carded. You're a citizen.
Yeah.
Well, green card in the other country.
The Bahamas?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could
So,
probably just
There was
write them a letter.
on Joe Rogan's podcast. He had someone on who made a shit ton of money from Bitcoin, and he's basically lives in a community in Puerto Rico that's just like all people who made an assload of money on digital currencies. So like basically once the country got flattened by the hurricane, they just came in there and bought this place and just made this like luxury area. And he's like, well, everything's dirt cheap. There's almost no taxes, and you know, I'm making money all online anyway. There's no incentive not to do that, right? So
That just like goes to that. Is exactly what you say. Like you raise
and,
tax
yeah,
on
and the Puerto
corporations.
Ricans want them there because
Yeah.
everyone who lives there has $0. So if they collect 5% from a lot of dollars, it's better than 40% of $0. So they've been like actively recruiting these people who, and you know, as jobs become increasingly more on the internet, people are going to have a lot more freedom, as you've seen with people fleeing from, you know, the Northeast and far west and moving to lower tax rate states, because why would you pay more taxes when you could do your job somewhere else and not do that thing? Like the guy we met in oh no, you weren't there yet.
In San Diego, yeah.
Yeah, me and Nick met that guy in San Diego who works for a California company, flies around and tries to get clients for his whatever company he was working for, but he's like lives in Alabama. It's like doesn't pay any taxes, has this giant house that he paid, you know, $200,000 for, and whenever he needs to go to California, he just hops on a plane.
Now, like over like a super extended period of time, if like our tax rates stay the same, would it not be like a phenomenon similar to like white flight, but it would be like rich flight?
It's already happened. Let's see if I can get an article here about
And then the U.S. suddenly the U.S. starts losing the money. So then you don't have the rich people to take the money from. Then where's the money start coming from? Like I just feel like it's not sustainable the way they're doing it.
So like the Alabama guy thing is kind of interesting though, because you would have to begin to think that you begin to not get what you don't pay for, in the sense that even if you do have a bunch of money, you live in a mansion in Alabama, like a common tax kind of joke. It's like it doesn't make the road in front of your house any better, or your police
Especially
force
if you're
any
living at Kevin's house.
Yeah.
Government
Or the
jacked up
police.
Kevin's road.
Well, that's because Kevin's town is very heavily funded taxes into schools and not so much into anything else really. Yeah, you live in the boondocks, you get boondocks life.
Kevin doesn't live in the boondocks.
Yeah, boondocks isn't right.
He doesn't live in Titusville.
Well, it's close enough. You go like a mile north of him, you're in the boondocks.
Just because there's a guy protesting the pipeline with some really creepy shit in his front yard doesn't mean it's the Boondocks.
Just because there's a place called Hillbilly Hall up there.
Oh
Doesn't
yeah.
mean it's the
We should go to
boondocks.
Hillbilly Hall sometime.
I'd be down. I've been wanting to go there. I hear they have good pizza.
Well, that just seems unlikely. The Italians aren't hillbillies; they're just white trash.
Well, Chambersburg, all the Italians moved out. They had to go somewhere. But yeah, 'cause that's
Alright.
another thing.
Yeah, this is a complex. That was a bad question. All right, we're gonna move on. We're gonna wrap this up. Final question. Someone sent me something somewhere. All right. Kurt, you here? Kurt's here.
Yep.
Okay. So our final topic is my favorite by far.
Oh.
So what we wanted to wrap this up with is free speech, the internet, and my boy Alex Jones.
That's near and dear to all of our hearts.
So let me start off. Alex Jones is a right-leaning person who makes podcasts similar to us, but he also enjoys conspiracy theories. Some of his famous ones are that the kids who died in the Sandy Hook school shooting were paid actors and didn't really die. That there's a pizza place in DC where Hillary Clinton and other prominent Democrats were running a child sex ring. If you remember, someone actually went in there with a gun and shot somebody.
I do remember.
And the government is dropping things and it's turning the frogs gay.
Ah, there it is.
I was waiting for it.
Yep. So, 2 weeks ago now, this podcast was going to happen like the day after this event happened, but you've all been slow rolling me. So, over the weekend, 2 weeks ago, he was banned from Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, all in the same day.
iTunes.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
because it's a
Podcast.
podcast.
yeah, so his
Yeah,
thing
yeah,
is
yeah.
called InfoWars. So he has his own website, Infowars.com. Shout out to Alex Jones. And so he has apps on the Google Play and Apple stores, which are still there. However, they removed all of his podcasts, which you could buy just like songs from the Apple store or whatever you iPod kids use. Also, he was completely kicked off of YouTube, Spotify, and about a week later, he was temporarily banned from Twitter, which I believe is still going on. So, this is what we're getting into here. That, of course, all of these companies who removed him are all private companies. However, how much do these companies have a responsibility to uphold the First Amendment? So let me finish my thing here. So they where's my statistic? So Facebook and Google, of course, Google's subsidiaries include Jesus Christ, include YouTube and stuff like that, and Facebook subsidiaries are Instagram, which he's also banned on, and they account for 70% of internet traffic. 70%. So,
Is that a monopoly yet?
so, I mean, it's certainly a duopoly, right?
Mm-hmm.
But do these, because they're such a large portion of the internet, and the internet is inarguably the largest place for speech to occur, do they then have to meet a higher standard when universally banning someone, even someone who says things that are extremely ridiculous, such as Alex Jones? This was a quote from Jack, who is the CEO of Twitter,
That guy's a beta cook.
he is certainly a beta cuck. Tangent. He apologized for eating at Chick-fil-A because Chick-fil-A is extremely sexist, apparently, and he was eating there during Gay Pride Month.
They're too damn Christian at Chick-fil-A.
Publicly apologized for eating at Chick-fil-A and posting a picture of it on the website that he owns. He's also worth $3.5 billion and still apologized to internet social justice warriors.
Huh.
So, I mean, there's like 3 versions of this. They're they're
Private company.
yeah. I mean, private's not the right word because they're publicly traded.
Yeah.
But like, they're companies and therefore should have the right to regulate whatever content is on their own page. The second one is that with these like hearings you've seen in Congress over mostly like trying to Russian influence in the 2016 election, that these companies are held ethically responsible for the content that it puts on its page, and therefore has to make sure that content put up there fall within some sort of ethical standards. Or this is a quote: Twitter should not decide what is the truth, what is news, or what is the truth, and should just take a hands-off approach. So I guess the first level of this I want to talk about is, are these companies responsible for free speech? Because the Supreme Court has decided that free speech in a designated public forum receives the highest level of scrutiny in favor of the speaker. So you have to have like the most pressing negative thing, like their threat of violence or impending violence would be the only way you could legitimately restrict people who are going to speak. And do you think that these companies should be subject to that standard? All right, Kurt, hit me up.
I don't think there's an interpretation of that where you can't admit that something like Twitter is like a huge public forum, if not the biggest, public announcement medium.
That's what I use for news now. I just go on Twitter.
Oh, really?
Yep.
I mean, I didn't actually know that extended to. Well, that's only for if it becomes necessary to take them down. But if someone, like if, I don't know, a sovereign company, a company that can make its own decisions about its own content.
It should be noted the First Amendment only applies to the federal government and the states. So, in order for this to become a freedom of speech issue, you would have to make the case that the internet is a public forum, which is probably true, and these companies are responsible for upholding that public forum based off of the percentage of the internet that occurs on their pages.
Even if the internet was a public forum, does that make the website a public forum? You can still create your own domain.
Mm-hmm. So that's one of the arguments, is that no one can take down his website, InfoWars, so therefore he's not being censored and the companies can do whatever they want.
See, the thing is, it is censorship. It doesn't have to be by the government if it's censorship. You can self-censor. That's a thing. They certainly shouldn't be compelled to censor that because of the high standard, because that's a standard to compel action against someone who is using a public forum to, make tangible plans to, assassinate someone or something like that. Like, that's different. We're talking about, are they protected? And the answer is no.
Directly incite imminent lawless action.
Mm-hmm. Imminent.
Yeah.
Directly.
Yes. Free speech in a designated public forum receives the highest level of scrutiny for state or federal action against those people compared
so the only
to
thing
anything else.
The only thing I wanted to clear up with that was so when the guy went up to shoot the pizza place,
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't direct. So it kind of passes, right?
We can talk about that, whether or not Alex Jones should be responsible for the actions of the people who view his podcast.
All right, so we'll pin that for later, and we'll get through the intros. I just wanted to clear that up.
All right, so Kurt, I don't think you really finished that up. So
Yeah,
what is your opinion? Do you think that Facebook and Google fall under this? Do you think that they're violating the First Amendment, I guess?
No, I don't think they are.
And tell me why in 1 or 2 sentences.
1 or 2.
Don't censor it.
Censorship.
I don't see it as ethical to compel them to have to give a platform to someone that is not. I don't see it making sense to compel them to give a platform to someone if they're not rejecting it on the basis of protected class. That's 1 sentence.
Is that the only sentence?
It didn't make sense as a sentence. I agree that it was a sentence.
Well, you're asking what? Are they responsible for free speech? Like, it's perfectly fine to deplatform someone.
Okay, so in your opinion, the YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, iTunes, Facebook, I suppose Facebook already, Twitter, all banning Alex Jones is not a violation of his First Amendment rights.
I don't think those companies are responsible for facilitating his exercise of First Amendment rights.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. That is perfectly reasonable. Dejak, hit me up.
All right. So this guy takes me to one of the better memes I've seen in a while. It's the superhero who's sweating between 2 buttons. And on the one side is Alex Jones is it's okay for Alex Jones to get censored by these companies, and the other side is it's not okay for the NFL players to kneel and get fined for it by the NFL. And you can also flip that. You could say, it's wrong for Alex Jones to get censored, but it's right for the NFL to call out the people kneeling during the national anthem. And so it's kind of this funny duality that, you got to either let it all go for one or all go for the other. Either the companies are, either in both scenarios, the companies are completely allowed to do that, or in both scenarios, the companies are not allowed to do that. Assuming that Alex Jones isn't doing anything that would require government intervention in covering up his First Amendment rights. Because obviously, I don't think the NFL players kneeling during the national anthem is also really doing anything that would need to be covered up by the First Amendment, because it's not really inciting direct violence. So, where I'm kind of stuck on is, which side do I fall on that? And probably the whole purpose of this opening statement. And I almost want to take the side of it's wrong in both cases for the companies to censor these First Amendment rights. Even though Alex Jones cannot lose his main platform to exercise these, I would default back to the same idea as the NFL players being under the same kind of situation that, if they were fined or fired for kneeling during the national anthem, then they would be losing their platform to speak. And Alex Jones, in the same way, I don't know how much web traffic InfoWars gets, as opposed to Alex Jones on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all that. And I think he's losing a major level of his platform, and that's kind of where I'm at with it.
So, I have a little bit of data on that. After he was banned from everything, InfoWars got an extreme surge in both downloads on Google and Apple, as well as hits on his website because of all of the attention he got. But he does have fairly large pages on both. 20K plus followers, essentially. So
Is
it's
he-
it's certainly an important aspect of his business.
Also, is he still part of the Blaze, or is Infowars its own thing now?
Infowars is its own thing. I'm not sure if the
Okay.
Blaze exists anymore.
Really? Huh. Him and Glenbeck were a good combination.
Alright. So, Kurt says companies can do whatever they want. Ryan says First Amendment being infringed. Austin, what do you got?
I think the companies should be able to do what they want, because it's like it's a very slippery slope there, right? Where, like, how many times have you heard of, like, people saying, like, what, like, you know, like the people who wouldn't make a wedding cake for a gay couple, right? Like, it's all falls into the same umbrella of, like, at what point is it like, okay, it's my business, I do what I want with it, to where it becomes you have to, I don't know, not cower to somebody like someone else is saying, but I just think I think just let it happen. Like, who cares? Just people are gonna be people. People are gonna say stuff that you don't agree with, you know, all the time. It just seems like you should just let people have their own businesses and companies do their own thing.
That seemed like a conflicting sentence to me. You should let people do whatever they want, seeming like that everyone should be able to say what they want. Then you said that companies should be able to do whatever they want and should restrict speech in whatever manner that they choose in this situation.
Well, I mean, they shouldn't be obligated. Like people shouldn't have to tell companies, or like the government shouldn't have to, or shouldn't be telling companies like, you have to do this, you have to that. Like, I think that if someone's gonna say shit on Twitter, right? If it goes against what Twitter stands for, that's your company, that's your forum. Like, obviously that, you know, then do what you will. But, like, you shouldn't be a medium between, you know, what the government thinks is right and what you think, right? So I guess it is confusing though to say people should be able to do what they want, but then also saying the company should be able to do what they want.
I think you can reconcile those two beliefs.
I'm all for the
You
individual.
just don't compel action from anyone
Yeah.
to be censored or to provide or to facilitate communication.
If Twitter's gonna say you can't talk about this on our website because we don't stand for it, well, then you're choosing to use the services of a company that has that stand, right? So it's bad for business for Twitter. If Twitter becomes all about hate mongering and stuff like that, obviously it isn't. I don't think it is, but, you know, if someday Twitter becomes a medium for, you know, white supremacy, I'm assuming that most African Americans wouldn't use it, right? And that's bad for business. That's obviously an extreme case, but yeah.
Is there any legal precedent for companies being responsible if they do hold a monopoly? Or a duopoly? Because really, they should be broken up, I suppose, if they've gotten to that point anyway.
So, no. So that was kind of what I wanted to talk about, is like a potential Supreme Court case, because the Supreme Court is notoriously horrendous at addressing issues as technology progress. Like, they did a horrible job when people came out with, like, pay phones, and then a really bad job with cell phones, like Fourth Amendment privacy stuff that I won't get into. And so it's interesting, because I'm going to take Dejak's side here. I'm going to argue that based on the size of these companies and the percentage of internet traffic that they control, that they should be subjected to standards of the size that they're at, that they should be subjected to...
They should have those responsibilities.
Yes.
Preserve the First Amendment.
Because I think that's similar to saying, like, the public forum thing, a lot of came up with cases about anti-abortion advocates trying to hand out pamphlets outside of places where people were receiving abortions. So this is almost, to me, like if people were trying to protest abortions, but then one company owned 70% of the sidewalks, and because you couldn't, and they just say you can't protest on this 70% of the sidewalks, I think that based off of their size, they own so much of the most important public forum that their ability to limit speech in any way they see fit is a violation of the First Amendment.
Huh. But really, isn't this a problem that would be solved by breaking up these companies then, if it comes to that point? Instead of holding them to that standard, shouldn't they just be, I don't know.
And I mean, that'd be ideal if these companies could be broken up, if these social media platforms would operate that way. And what it would really take is a major shift, especially from if Alex Jones was like 20 times more respected and his ward was taking that seriously, there would have been a major shift into some other third-rate social media website. But at the moment, it's not enough to do that, especially amongst the younger generation who's predominantly Democratic, who's going to stick to what they already had. They're not really going to change. And that's where the danger comes in. And SoFlo's example of, the extreme example of Twitter becoming this hate-mongering kind of white supremacist website. It's almost possible to happen in the opposite direction because of something like this. If what's the name of the Twitter CEO guy?
Jack Dorsey.
If Jack Dorsey is gonna be as much of a cuck as to, apologize for eating at Chick-fil-A, you can imagine how easily he's swayed by social justice warriors who are a large majority of the people who use his website. It's just gonna be this place where everyone will go for one single idea, as opposed to a possible realm of criticism that could exist, and not thinking critically. They're just going to groupthink, get together, and just consolidate in this dogmatic lump of, nonsense, and people will feed into it as well.
And we see some of that with the recent controversy over the quote-unquote shadow banning of conservatives. People like Ben Shapiro, like Jordan Peterson, these mainstream conservative people are having their internet traffic viewed by less people because their views are controversial. But there's also the possible point to take that the advertisers are driving this. People only want to have their products next to popular topics, I guess, and don't want to advertise for controversial opinions. But
unless they're desperate.
True. So we're pretty 2v2 split on this, and I do see your point, as I'm usually very for hands-off government and having essentially a hands-on government. I mean, how much hands-on they would need to be is questionable, whether how much they need to get involved in order to protect people, but it's certainly something I had to think about a lot.
It definitely is a fine line, and I could also, advocate for the other side as well, with also SoFlo bringing up the whole gay baker thing, refusing to bake for gay couples, and it's you're just resegregating your business, and if it becomes a big thing, then you just resegregated the United States again, something nobody wants. But
see, I think the gay baker thing is against the Civil Rights Amendment. I don't see any difference between that and banning black people from your motels.
Yeah, and so that's against the already in place amendment kind of. So that's a good point. So now I'm more on the side I was originally on then, because that was the only thing that I could really pick up on.
Kurt, do you have any
Just make the internet a utility? Question mark?
Make the internet a utility? Well, that seems like a not good idea.
Just like, how are you ever gonna control what's on the? How is that? How is that ever gonna?
But they just did it.
What I'm saying is they're doing it, yeah.
But they're not really doing it. It's not like you can't go on the internet and find someone saying the thing or 10 times worse.
They eradicated Alex Jones from 70% of the internet.
But they're gonna you get rid of Alex Jones. There's not other people crazy stuff somewhere else.
I mean, Glenn Beck, I think, is still on Twitter. But I mean, it just kind of seems like I mean, then it's just even more.
He's controlled opposition. He gets to stay.
But like, that's the thing.
False
It's like
flag.
it's like a targeted hit. Like, and Alex Jones, of course, responded to this, being like, "Well, I must have said something right then." Just kind of funny.
Oh shit! Does that lend him credibility?
Well, that's kind of an option in all this.
Let me posit this for you. Would it be different if Paul Ryan was the person that was banned from these sites?
Of course.
Shit.
Paul Ryan is the Speaker of the House. He's a Republican,
Yeah.
for those of you playing
Or
along.
for everyone else, yes.
But you gotta look at that in like a scope of like realistic. Like how realistic is it that someone who's so in the spotlight would say something that bad? You know what I mean? Like people bitch and moan about Trump every day, right? And like what's next? Like, oh, we don't like what Trump stands for. We're gonna ban him from Twitter. Honestly, I'm not one way or the other. Trump is Trump. Let him do his thing. I'm a Republican, but like, I really wish they would ban him from Twitter because it would give the liberals a lot less to talk about. But
Yeah, I think the only reason he's not been banned from Twitter is because of his status. I think that a lot of what
And
he
they
said
give
would
Twitter
get him
traffic,
kicked
of course.
Yeah.
Poor Don.
Which makes you wonder too, because I bet you a lot of Alex Jones. I'm gonna be honest. The majority of Alex Jones videos that I've ever seen have come from Facebook.
Huh.
I don't think I've ever gone out of my way to watch Alex Jones.
See, that's what it is. Like, you can't ban his platform, but you can stop his platform from growing and reaching new viewers by... That's what social media is, right? It's you get your stuff to the most people, even people that don't directly follow you, right? Like,
Well,
you
then there's
see
also some
something that was, like,
grandmas.
retweeted or liked by somebody else, or just popped up, or even was sponsored and put in front of you. Like, that's how you find new content, is through social media. So, I mean, certainly you're not kicking his own website off the internet, but you're like cutting off his growth mechanism.
Exposure.
What was? I mean, it's kind of funny. It's like if you want to communicate, this is a WWE example, which makes it kind of weird, but instances like Chris Benoit was pretty bad. So to explain, Chris Benoit went on like a steroid post-concussion syndrome rampage, killed his wife and his kid and himself. He's been erased from WWE history. Hulk Hogan in the interview, in conjunction with the sex tape, in an interview, dropped the N-bomb about his daughter dating a black guy. He got erased from history. He was recently brought back though. And it becomes this kind of hard issue to disperse ideas then, because it's like if I was, say, communicating with someone through like a WWE social network, and I wanted to say something about Hulk Hogan, and WWE bans that, and I can never talk about Hulk Hogan because they literally erased him from history, it'd be kind of interesting because it almost erases that person from that sphere. Literally, you can't talk about him. It's like, oh, I found this funny Alex Jones video, I'm going to send it to you. But you can't.
I mean, how about something near and dear to our heart, League of Legends? You can't say racial slur, like they censor, racial slurs, like they ban people. Like that's already happening. But like I said, like I don't think the government went to League and said, "Look, Riot, I'm gonna need you guys to start banning and censoring words X, Y, and Z because we just don't want that." Yeah, it's a bad look.
There's a difference between forcing people to ban stuff and forcing people to not ban anything, right?
Yeah, so I would say that. Well, that's the thing. I agree that some people should be censored and banned, but at the same time, I believe that it's up to the discretion of the provider, not someone else, because like we're all humans. Like we shouldn't need someone to tell us like it's person's saying this person's saying that. I just think once you tell a company this is what you can't let people say on your site, it opens a door that you don't want to open. Whereas if you
We're arguing the opposite, right?
yeah, but if you let your company, I think if you just let them alone, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a company that is going to be okay with people saying some of the stuff that they could be capable of saying. I don't know. It's tough to put faith in, but
like, if I wanted to go out on the sidewalk, as long as I had a permit, I can say literally whatever I want. Like, actually anything.
Yeah, look at the Klan rallies.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I could have a KKK rally through Hopewell as long as I received the proper permitting and applied with the time, place, manner restrictions. Anything I want. But that ability does not exist. Alright, let me put it this way. What percentage of internet traffic would Facebook and Google have to control in order for them to be a violation of the First Amendment? Or could them, even if they owned 100%, would it not be a violation of the First Amendment?
well, who are you saying is violating the First Amendment, though? Are you saying Twitter is? Or are you saying the government is? Are you saying the government's telling Twitter they have to do it? Or are you telling me that Twitter's doing it on their own?
If Twitter had a monopoly, basically like 100%, and they did it on their own, I think is the premise of the question.
Yeah,
If they controlled 100% of the public forum, and then they banned Alex Jones, would that be a violation of the First Amendment, or
now,
not?
are you saying like 100% of the public forum, like in this world, like we don't have things like we don't have things like Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff anymore?
The only social media is Twitter.
Yeah, a hypothetical world where the only social media is Twitter, and they get so big that 100% of internet traffic flows into Twitter.
Well, then I would say in this day and age that I might support saying like, that would almost be akin to like screwing up people's freedom of speech, right? Like it would be so bad at that point. Like that, because like we live in such a digital age now that like if you could completely and then say like there will be none of this, that, and the other thing on the internet, then I think that's going too far. I don't think that'll ever happen. That I don't think anyone will ever have a complete monopoly on everything.
But what we're saying is Facebook and Google are pretty damn close. Facebook, Google, and Twitter are pretty close to having
At a
full
certain
monopoly.
point, the degree is arbitrary where you draw the line, I think.
And he's saying that like in this world, all of them would have the same. Like, they would all have the same stance on it. Like they'd all ban the same stuff. Like they'd all get together in a room and say, "This is what we're all deciding to ban."
I'm saying that they did that with Alex
Alex
Jones.
Jones.
But that's with a guy. That's not like a blanket ban. That's not like every time you try to type the N-word. You know, Little Yachty tries to make a tweet saying like, "Oh, my N-words and I going out to this club tonight, come through," and N-word gets starred out just as like a default by Twitter. Like I don't think that's ever gonna happen. I think that's where it would be like you'd seriously be in a situation where, oh, what's going on with the country? I don't know. Oh no, that's a good point. I'd have to see it, I guess, to believe it.
But from Alex Jones' perspective, a large portion of his speech has been cut off. Kurt, what do you got for me? Got some nuggets?
The internet was a mistake. You shouldn't have done it. You have to go back.
I like how you made a good modal realist claim, Kevin. I'm proud of you.
A good modal realist claim.
Yeah.
Are those real words?
Yeah, it is actually. It's basically using the argument that in a hypothetical world X, and if you could imagine that, wouldn't that mean in our world Y? It's kind of a whole metaphysical.
Anyway, I think it boils down to: do you want to rule on this categorically, or do you want to rule on it practically? And like categorically, you can't really dictate what private entities do with what speech they facilitate. But practically speaking, yeah, once you do control most of what has become the most important public forum in the world, you're basically denying exposure to, certain individuals, and it might be arbitrary too. You might have no standards for what you censor, which might be even worse.
This is
You
a
might
good
just-
example.
yeah.
Telephone companies in the United States are not able to censor people because they're considered free speech. What's the difference between Alex Jones calling people on the phone and Alex Jones calling people on Twitter?
Isn't that a utility though?
Yes.
Well, it's a different standard then.
Exactly, but should that standard not be applied to the internet? Isn't the internet the next thing, right? Like, first we had like the freedom to protest on the streets, then
Yeah.
we protest through the telephone wires, and now
Well, what if that responsibility fell more to things like ISPs then, as opposed to individual websites? Do you know what I mean?
so you're
Like
saying
you can,
Verizon could censor Alex Jones, but like Comcast doesn't?
no, I would say the inverse. Like the person providing access to the internet probably shouldn't be able to censor you for that.
So you're pro net neutrality.
Oh God.
Oh yeah.
Whole other topic.
Well, how is that? How is it different if like Twitter or no, if corporations blanket ban Alex Jones versus Verizon throttles all traffic to his website, not just like Facebook and YouTube, that like any traffic towards his own website throttled from other users. Isn't that an even worse approach?
But I feel like you're arguing against yourself. You're arguing that companies shouldn't be able to.
Was I
throttle-
supposed to pick a side? I don't know.
Yeah, you're supposed to pick a side, Kurt.
Oh.
You're arguing that companies shouldn't throttle traffic to Alex Jones' site, but they could just block it altogether.
Oh, I don't really have sides. I just say things.
Bernie Sanders.
See, I think this is a really interesting issue that could have future impact, right? Because Facebook, YouTube, Google, Twitter, I mean, they're only getting larger, right? As these old people, like there's a study that came out that people who watch cable news have an average age of over 60. Like, in
People who
20
have
years,
cable probably have
is cable news not just gonna not exist, and like 100% of news sources are going to thrive online? Like, there's almost no way that that's not how we're going, unless like the internet 2 comes out. That like
Dark web.
all news people are going to be done online. And I think that we should probably prepare ourselves for a point in time where almost all speech comes online, and we should adapt the First Amendment to set a standard for the internet.
Definitely needs to be done.
Tell you, this
But then-
topic is so scintillating, Kevin, I accidentally mulliganed the quest.
Now that's when you know. So, I think that's certainly an interesting topic. We I think we're probably out of talking points, and we're at an hour and a half, so that's pretty solid.
It's pretty long.
Yeah, that's pretty long. I
Good
think
job,
that if something similar to that happens in the future with someone who's more political minded, that this is going to be
Pop off.
a real dividing issue, right? Like, if Fox News gets banned from YouTube and Twitter, right? I think that we could find ourselves in some interesting times. All right, start with our outros. Kurt, where can people find more of you at?
People can look forward to my sultry voice on the next arguing some antics.
Topics for arguing semantics too have already been chosen.
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
All right, Dejak.
Yeah, well, you can find me on this stream and YouTube channel. Yeah, just
He has
wherever
a
Kevin tells me
flamin'-
to go.
Yeah, wherever I tell Dejak.
He has a great plays.tv. Remember to like, comment, and
Oh, yeah.
subscribe.
Yeah, if you want to see some juicy Baron and Dragon steals,
So,
go for it.
in the description of this video will be links to our Twitter until they ban us for saying this.
I have a Twitter.
And yeah, so YouTube arguing semantics, Twitter we're podcast Seinfeld, and yeah. Okay, I guess we're done here.
So play us off.
Play us off, Johnny.
Do 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 do.
Thank you, Bjergsen. All right.